Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Oxfam, I am so honored to welcome you to the Taxation for Fair Climate Financing. It is so inspiring to see so many leaders, thinkers, activists here today. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I want to start by thanking our partners, Club de Madrid and the Global Solidarity Levies Task Force, for their vision and collaboration in making this conversation possible. We gather at a moment of stark contrasts. While communities worldwide struggle with floods and heat waves and storms, the fossil fuel industry is reporting record profits. In 2022 alone, fossil fuel companies made $583 billion in profits after taxes. And meanwhile, three major companies, BP, Shell, Equinor, have slashed their future low-carbon investment targets by 73%, 37%, and 41% respectively. The costs of this inaction are staggering. The emissions of just 340 fossil fuel companies each year make up half of all global emissions. Emissions from a single year are enough to cause 2.7 million heat-related deaths over the coming century. But there is a clear and fair solution. Oxfam's research released in June showed that a polluter profits tax on 590 oil, gas, and coal companies could raise up to $400 billion in its first year. The tax could be designed so that it is higher on excess profits, therefore shifting investment incentives away from fossil fuels and toward renewable energy, and ensuring that investors, rather than consumers, bear the cost of the transition. Crucially, this is an idea people support. Polling across 11 countries representing more than half of the world's population found that 8 in 10 people support taxing rich polluters to pay for climate action. I am delighted that our panel today includes leaders who are moving these efforts globally and locally, including here in New York, and that today the Club de Madrid released an important open call from 38 former world leaders calling for taxation on fossil fuel companies, and we will get to hear more about that over the course of this discussion. But entrenched interests, as we know, will not give way easily, and that is why gatherings like these are so important, bringing together policymakers, youth leaders, experts, and campaigners. It is a fundamental galvanizing time. So thank you all again for joining us today. I look forward to such an energizing and challenging conversation with our distinguished panel. And it is my pleasure to hand over to my colleague, our moderator, Ashfaq Khalfan, who is a senior fellow at Oxfam and new director of the Sustainability Regulation Observatory at the London School of Economics. Ashfaq, over to you.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you very much. So that was a typical Oxfam welcome with lots of numbers. I'm sure people may have been trying to write that and couldn't, but we have a QR code so you can get the numbers and the research that she was referring to over there. So I would now like to welcome our panelists up to the stage, and I'll briefly introduce them as we do that. Please come on up, the panelists. We're going to have 2 rounds of questions. They're each going to give brief 3-minute responses. After that, we'll have a short video, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions for hopefully about 20 minutes, questions and comments from the audience. So I'm delighted to welcome our panel. Our first, among them we have Prime Minister Mari Kiviniemi, who was the Prime Minister of Finland and the OECD Deputy Secretary General. She was elected to Parliament at the age of 26 and has held several other ministerial posts and is now in the private sector, in addition to her work with the Club de Madrid. Okay. From Kenya, Ambassador Mohammed couldn't join us, but he sent his Yusuf Hussein, his deputy, who is at the office of the Special Envoy for Climate Change, which is under the direct executive office of the President. And he has been involved very much with the Global Solidarity Levels Task Force, which is co-chaired by 3 countries, Kenya, France, and Barbados. Then we have Friederike Roder, who is the director of the Secretariat of the task force, which is hosted by the European Climate Foundation. And she has over 20 years of work in this area, including with Global Citizen and the One Campaign, as well as with assignments for the German government, the Arab Reform Initiative, the African Union, and others. We have Arthur Bauer from France. He's the Deputy Economic Advisor at the French Mission here in New York. But before that was previously the Treasury in France, working on international finance issues, including climate recovery damage clauses and both loans and grant financing under the bilateral efforts and under the Paris Club. Louder. Okay. We have Diego Casais, who's the program director at the Climate Emergency Collaboration Group, which is a philanthropic collaboration working on enhancing multilateral cooperation on climate and development. He is a Skoll Foundation Fellow, and before was a senior director of the Global Campaigning Organization of us. And the last speaker we have is Blair Horner, who's the... oh, did I miss? Sorry. all these people blocking her. Sorry. Yes, so Marinelle is... she created the first climate strike in the Philippines and has more recently spearheaded global campaigns such as the Make Rich Polluters Pay campaign and the Amnesty Right for Rights campaign, which supported dignified relocation for survivors of the super typhoon Haiyan, which affected her and her family. She was the main petitioner to the National Inquiry on Climate Change, which secured a landmark resolution affirming the liability of major fossil fuel companies for human rights harms for climate impacts. It's interesting because Philippines and New York and Vermont are some of the leading countries that are considering legislation on fossil fuel companies and holding them accountable for climate damages, considering in Philippines and implemented in New York, as you're going to hear from Blair. Blair Horner is the senior policy advisor at the New York Public Interest Research Group, and he was previously its legislative and executive director. He played a central role in the passage of the New York Superfund Climate Act that you'll hear about. And he was also the special advisor to the New York Attorney General previously. So we have lots of expertise here, and we do not have a lot of time to do it, but they've all agreed to be quite brief in their answers. And so I'll open up the first round of questions. And we'll start with Prime Minister Kivinyemi. Prime Minister, you've spoken a lot about the need to rebuild trust between citizens and their leaders. How can taxing polluters play a role in that rebuilding of trust and shifting the politics of climate action?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today and discuss this very topical theme that really is so that trust in governments have been declining in recent years, and that is a challenge for all the governments almost all over the world. Also in those countries where the trust has been very high they have had troubles and challenges, and that has then meant that the government a country has been more challenging than ever, and it has also led to that their people have been more tended to vote for authoritarian leaders and populist parties. But I really believe that the question of democratic legitimacy is central to climate finance too. And citizens need to see that those who are most responsible for the crisis are also the ones contributing the most to the solutions. And when governments place fair taxes on polluters, it signals accountability, and it tells people that the system is not asking ordinary families who are already struggling with high costs to carry the burden alone. So it's ensuring that powerful corporations who profited from fossil fuels pay their fair share. And that is not only fair, it's politically transformative. So climate action stops being framed as a cost imposed on everyday people and instead becomes a story of justice and responsibility. And this builds trust between citizens and institutions, trust that is sorely needed in democracies today, as I said. And importantly, the public is already ahead of us. Recent surveys show that 8 in 10 people around the world support taxing oil and gas corporations to fund climate solutions. So citizens want this. By aligning climate finance with fairness, we can strengthen both democracy and the politics of climate action. And it really is so that people, if the governments want to increase the trust in governments, what is needed is really fairness and respect, and that is what the citizens want. And of course, it's important that all the services are delivered efficiently, and that there are services, and taxation is the basis for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'll now pass to Yusuf Hussain. So many countries have hugely significant political constituencies which are behind the polluting industries and can block multilateral agreements. So in your capacity as one of the leaders of the task force, what do you see as the way forward to overcome this? And what do you see as the opportunity going to COP30 in Belém?
Thank you, Ashraf. I want to register apologies on behalf of Ambassador Ali first, because the president is around and he could not move. He has to train the president and support him. Hope that is accepted to everybody, and especially to the organizers. To your question now, yes, the main idea behind the formation of the coalition and the task force is the shrinking space for multilateralism. You heard what happened yesterday here in the US with the president, and I mean, it's going to be worse if we are not optimistic. So that is number one. It's an alternative to. It's an alternative to the multilateralism space that is shrinking by the day. Two, I think, and the speakers before me had really emphasized on the importance of taxing the high polluting, because they contribute significant effects to the crisis, and then they should be, hence, since they are making a lot of profit, they should be able to also contribute to the solution, and that is the idea we pursued as a coalition. Yes, there are a lot of countries have support for the high emitting sectors, and right now it's actually becoming worse by the day, with support gaining everywhere, with aid cut and all those things, so no alternative. We were all talking about bridging the quantum that we had envisioned in Baku, and that can only come from resources from these sectors, high emitting sectors. So in principle, what we are pushing is the polluter pay principle, where the effect you have should also be corresponding to the solution you will offer. And to do that, we're building a coalition of countries. It's not going to be achieved by a day or two, but we have made significant progress in the last 2 years or so, with the support from the secretariats, that's the European Climate Foundation, and the co-chair countries of France and Barbados, and several other countries that is not limited to any regional bloc, I mean, both North and South. And we are optimistic that by COP30 in Belém, we'll have some concrete deliverables as we are deliberating our way right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. I'll pass to your the co-chair country, so Altabar. Could you tell us a bit about France's experience? You've championed solidarity levies in the past with airline levies, excess profit. What do you see as what are the lessons we should learn from some of these domestic experiences from France?
Thank you so much, Ashfaq, for the question. I'm happy to be here. As you're saying, France actually championed solidarity levies in the past, and let me just give you two examples. So first, over the aviation levies taxes that you may all remember, that was announced 20 years ago, actually, and that is implemented in France. So it shows that it's possible. All flights departing from France are actually taxed, and to a rate that depends on their destination and to the class of travel. So actually, flights going to Europe are only taxed 7.4 euros in economy class, but long-haul flights have a tax of 40 euros. And for business jets, it goes up to 2,100 euros. So the idea of these rates is really to make the contribution depend on the ability of the people to actually pay for those taxes. And it's already strongly corrected with the emission of CO2. And the other example I would like to take is the tax on the road vehicles. So we have two sets of taxes in France. We have one tax on the CO2 emissions, and another one on tax on the weight of the vehicles. So heavier vehicles tend to actually emit more CO2, and they get taxed more. And those taxes are also very fair because richer households tend to be more concentrated in the household who buy this type of vehicle. So what lesson we can take from those two taxes are published in the multi-annual strategy that France for climate financing that France just published. My takeaway is that really France sees this taxation and fiscal policy to be necessarily aligned with the climate objective, but at the same time making sure that those who contribute the most are actually the ones who have the higher means.
Thank you. So these are some examples to talk to your at school, the feral parents and other groups and family members. Talk to them about this tax on SUVs that's coming out from France. So that's very important to do that. Okay, so we'll now move to Frédéric Roder. So also, in terms of, could you? So the task force brings together countries both from the global north and global south. I believe there are 20 countries, maybe you can correct me on that, who are now part of it. Could you tell us about where the political momentum is now for moving ahead on these in terms of the, bringing that coalition together?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, and we're very happy to partner today for this important discussion. And I'm very happy to be here with two representatives of my co-chair countries. Yeah, I think the most important thing is to know that this task force was put in place not even 2 years ago, and Yusuf Hussein has already said, I think we made quite some progress looking into different options, and I think we can come back to it. The basic assumption is that we obviously need way more climate and development finance. We've been struggling to meet the needs that are actually exploding, and but we're not really facing a money problem because money is there. The question is how to mobilize it, and I think the biggest momentum that we've created so far and that now needs to fully deliver in Belém in less than 2 months is that we were able, or 9 countries were able to announce a premium flyer solidarity coalition back in Seville in June at the UN conference for financing for development. And I think that's very important. It basically takes the example of the French levy that actually initially was initiated by President Chirac and President Lula. Good to mention, given that Brazil is hosting the COP. But it takes it a step further, I would say, and really with this idea that polluters need to pay, and in particular the biggest polluters and those that have the biggest means. Also going back to what the Prime Minister said, is that this is in the end about democratic legitimacy. And so the coalition aims really to focus on premium flyers, so business and first class, and on private jets. We have 9 countries, we need way more, and obviously also we need to define the details of the agreement, so exactly what the options are, because there are different options if you're looking at for instance, taxing private jets. And then also, I think very important, we're talking solidarity levies. It's obviously how the proceeds are being invested, both domestically and nationally, or globally, sorry. And you asked me where is the momentum, where is leadership coming from? So I think the coalition is actually a very good signal in today's world, where we're facing very strong geopolitical headwinds, if we could say. So it actually shows that progress is possible, that we need to find new alliances, and it's possible. So it's actually a very interesting mix of countries that we brought together from different regions, different also economic situations. It shows that, first of all, if we pull together, we're actually able to generate significant new resources, additional resources, debt-free resources, and that we don't have to rely on the old alliances or wait for global agreements. And I think this is a very important signal.
Thank you very much. Okay, now from the global to the local, I'll turn to Blair. If you could tell us a bit about New York Climate Superfund Act, which a similar law has passed in Vermont and is under consideration in 10 others. Tell us a bit more about it, please.
Sure, thank you for having me. So when we were thinking about this issue, the staggering costs of dealing with climate damages, it's just astronomical. The numbers are astronomical. But we're a state. We're not the United States government. So we were trying to figure out what is a way to sort of go after revenues to deal with the staggering. I'll give you a couple of examples. It's been estimated $50 billion to protect New York City Harbor. It's been estimated $100 billion just to upgrade the New York City sewer system, not just deal with the mass transit systems. These numbers are staggering. So how do you develop a state system that allows for clawing back profits from the companies that are most responsible and do it legally? There is a precedent in New York State and the country which is called a Superfund program. The Superfund program is a way for polluters who dump into the ground that may end up in your drinking water. They are on the hook, financial hook, for the cleanup and to protect people in those circumstances. They're on the financial hook. They are. And so the idea was, well, let's apply that to the atmosphere and say that there needs to be a climate Superfund. And so here's how it's set up. By the way, this is law now in New York. If you're responsible for the extraction or refining of a product that leads to greenhouse gas emissions that total 1 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions over the covered period, which is between 2000 and 2024, you're in the program. If you're in the program, you pay a percentage of whatever you're responsible for in terms of emissions toward the costs of the Superfund program. It's $75 billion in New York for over the next 25 years, averaging out basically $3 billion a year. So if you're responsible for 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world, you are on the hook for 10% of $3 billion. That money then is used basically for infrastructure projects to both deal with the damages from climate disaster that we're all living through, and to help protect people from future storms, heat waves, rising sea levels, whatever the heck it is. And we thought that this would be a good way not only to deal with that problem, but to set a precedent for the country for how to deal with clawing back the enormous profits from the oil industry and redirecting it toward the costs that the rest of us face. It's designed in a way that makes the polluter accountable, and it's designed in a way that the costs cannot be passed on to the public, which was the political winner when we were getting this done. The idea of saying that the polluters have to pay, you've already heard, it's very popular, makes perfect sense. And then lastly, that the cost will not be passed on to the public. In fact, will be usually just eaten by the companies themselves. That's how it worked. I'll stop there. Back to you.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to Marinelle. So you're a long-standing Make Polluter Pays activist. Can you tell us what brought you to that campaign and what you see, what are the demands?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I come to this campaign from my lived experience. I grew up in Eastern Samar in the Philippines, one of the hardest hit provinces during Super Typhoon Haiyan. And for those of you who don't know about Super Typhoon Haiyan, that was the strongest typhoon ever recorded, debatedly, in human history, that made landfall in our province in 2013 and has devastated hundreds of communities, including my own, and has killed thousands of people. And it really changed our lives from there. And it was made worse by climate change. But yet, the costs were borne by people. The cost was borne by ordinary people and not the fossil fuel corporation who are most responsible. Since then, I have worked with the survivors, the youth, and frontline communities, and I have seen how climate disasters have stripped away lives of people and have stripped away people's homes, livelihoods, and dignity. And I've also seen how fossil fuel corporations have continued to profit while we pay for that price. That's why I have joined Make Rich Polluters Pay campaign. And our demands are simple, but yet it's urgent. Since fossil fuel corporations are responsible for 75% of the global greenhouse gas emission, they should be taxed for the devastations they have caused. And that new tax revenue should directly go to the communities most impacted to help them recover, to help them rebuild, to help them adapt, and to help build resilience. Third, it's not a charity. It is justice. And it's not only fossil fuel companies, actually. The richest 1% contribute more to climate breakdown than the poorest 2/3 of humanity. And that is a justice issue we cannot just ignore. We live in a world with unprecedented wealth, but it is in the hands of the super rich and large corporations. If we tax the excessive wealth of these millionaires and billionaires, we could unlock trillions for climate action. And that wealth tax on millionaires and billionaires could raise up to or over $1.7 trillion a year for climate action. And combined with wealth and windfall tax, that could be $9 trillion a year. Imagine what that could mean. It could mean we can fund just energy transition. That could mean we can give compensation for loss and damage, and that could mean that the debt burdens of countries like the Philippines would be reduced. So Make Rich Polluters Pay is not just a slogan. It is actually it is a call to action, and it is a call for systemic justice so that these big polluters would actually pay their fair share of sorry.
Thank you. Diego, we've got a hard job. So this all sounds great, but what are the obstacles to getting international agreement on taxing polluters? What do you see as the strategic challenges we face?
You got the hardest question for me in the end. That's very interesting. I mean, I think there are like three things that we look in CCG in terms of obstacles. And I think Yusuf spoke about this in his intervention in the beginning, because the first one is actually the multilateral cooperation. Like we're all seeing, like the past 12 months, for example, the multilateral space is really shrinking. Our ability to build trust, to exchange, to learn with each other and negotiate and get to like meaningful outcomes, like it's really shrinking. So this, I think it's one of the things that we need to address very like heads-on. Like we need to go back to the foundations of multilateral cooperation, international cooperation, and think that it's possible, like to move forward on this. I think the second one, it speaks a lot to what all those fossil fuel companies do with the billions and the trillions that they get, that is the misinformation and disinformation. Like, let's face it, like those industries, they have billions available to push campaigns, ideas, narratives, disinformation, misinformation that are undermining the work of many of us that are here right now. And I think like unless we actually address these heads on and look beyond our bubble in climate and development, for example, just recently, like earlier today, I was in another thing, and one colleague was saying how instrumental it is for our climate and development community to actually learn with others, like in security, in tech. Like there was this lady working on data centers, for example, and she was saying like how we should be exchanging more, learning more with each other so that we can address those things. And then I think the last one I would say is the social licensing for oil. And I want to give a very short story to you guys. My partner is a film producer, and he was recently traveling in the northernmost part of the Amazon. And many of you have heard in the media about this threat of drilling in the offshore of the Amazon in Brazil. And what he was saying to me, like when he got back home, was every community that he would stop along the Amazon coast in the north were pretty much looking forward for the drilling because they thought that that was an economic alternative for them. Like their future was depending on this because the people who are actually in the film production, mostly from Sao Paulo, like they pay fewer taxes, they pay less in terms of like the oil and the gas they put in their car, like they pay less in everything. And for them, like the drilling was the economic alternative. Their future depend on this because there are no other alternatives in that region of the country. So the social licensing, and I think just to go back to also COP30, I think one of our colleagues mentioned, COP30 right now for me is an opportunity as well for us to challenge the social licensing that oil has in many of our countries, like in Brazil, across Latin America, in fact. So I think that is, for me, like one of the obstacles that need to be addressed like heads on.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move into our second round with shorter questions and shorter answers. So Thomas here will indicate when we are short of time. What? They're doing great, yeah. And I'll engage in some cultural stereotyping. He's half Dutch, so he'll. Okay, so I'll turn to Prime Minister Kiviniemi. So Club de Madrid has just issued the open letter that Abby referred to. How do we make such taxes viable politically?
So it is a big challenge, of course, and as was referred earlier in this discussions, the multilateralism now faces some challenges. But there are also good examples of successes, for example, at the OECD, automatic exchange of information on tax matters in order to get rid of tax havens. So that was a succeeded succession, and also a success, not success. And then also the base erosion and profit shifting agreement, which had to do on taxation of multinational companies. So there is possibility to achieve something also when it comes to this initiative. And especially when there is so great support also from the citizen side to this idea. And there is this urgency. We really need to act now. We don't have much time because we all can see in our own lives kind of the results of the climate change. So I'm always kind of positive I have a positive attitude towards the progress. So I think that there are possibilities to make it happen.
Yeah, and then that's some of wealth. There's figures that we've been seeing about that. So in terms of the letter signed by 38 world leaders, I was actually really struck by it, by the political spectrum, where people across the left to the right. So that was, that's interesting. And I think the QR code is that. So if you'd like to see the actual letter, it's there for you. Okay, I'll pass to Yusuf. And could you tell us a bit about what the task force has achieved? We've touched on it, but what else could you say about what the task force has achieved and is planning to do moving forward?
Thank you. I want to start by saying that the biggest achievement so far is when we had started this initiative in Dubai, we were just whispering. And now we are here gathered, this huge crowd. And I mean, growing by the day, we had 38 former heads of states signing. That is already an achievement. And I think we had created the momentum together with all the partners and everybody who cares in the space. But we had done a lot of technical work thanks to the experts in our cycle and the secretariats to even give countries reasons to onboard the idea, because you cannot just say, yeah, you just subscribe to the idea. So we have a lot of technical work, analysis on the levy menus that we had championed that gives reasons to parties to subscribe to the idea, not just subscription, but understand and feel, and I mean, be able to support with justification, technical justification. So there's a lot of work done behind the curtain on that front. And the other achievement I think we are proud of, but still expanding, is the launch of the Premium Flyer Coalition, Aviation Coalition that we launched in Sevilla, that we are envisioning to be the first concrete outcome of our work in Belém. And hopefully, with the political outreach we are doing, we will get more leaders to support it. So the road ahead is bumpy, but we feel like we are headed to the right direction, and we are going to help the world achieve the quantum. Because in where I come from, we will have to suspend education and health to cater for the climate crisis. So it's not a beautiful looking picture, but hopefully we can do something. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And I'll pass you to your fellow country co-chair, Arthur. Same question, just from your perspective. Where do you see the way going forward?
Thank you so much, Ashfaq, and
Maybe
thank you.
just close it to the
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, so France is really pushing forward this global solidarity levies agenda internationally. And obviously, as was said before, we strongly prefer multilateralism, and the UN Convention on Taxes would have been a perfect medium to push this solidarity levies. Unfortunately, this was not the road that was taken, and we can only regret that this opportunity has not been seized. But that said, France is a strong supporter of the coalition of the willings and this global solidarity levies task force. What was announced a few months ago in Sevilla is this coalition on the premium flyers contribution for fair resilience, first attention and resilience, and I think it has gathered already 9 countries together. And let me give you a brief idea about that. So why are we focusing on aviation? So basically because this is one of the most polluting sector, obviously, today, responsible for 2.5% of global emissions. And because it's still very concentrated for the wealthier households. And the idea behind this coalition is actually for those countries who would join, if they already have this kind of levies, then the idea will be to harmonize the rate internationally and upward, and make it progressive. And for those countries who do not have any of those levies, obviously to introduce one. And as Yusuf was saying, the road toward Belém is quite short, and but 2 working groups have been set up, and the idea is to publish a declaration in Belém that could be endorsed, and that would also provide user guide and legal model for the introduction of such taxes.
Thank you. And I'll pass to Frederica. You've been calling for this solidarity levies for a long time, so much so that they made you the director of the task force. But why did you go that direction? I mean, there are many other ways, national regulation, mobilizing public finance. What made you go down this direction?
There are different options, and I think we actually need all of them. But I think where, let's say, internationally coordinated solidarity levies are coming in is that, first of all, we it's not just that we need more financing. We need the right type of financing. We need predictable financing. We need more debt-free financing that can be given on as grants. In particular, also obviously to address issues such as loss and damage, adaptation, and support countries that are already under debt distress. I mean, I know you all know this, but a lot of the options that are being discussed and that are also good and we also need them, they won't provide this type of financing. I think we need to be very clear. It's unfortunately also the case that we won't see many increases from elsewhere. For instance, looking at what's happening with ODA budgets across the world. And I must say, I was always struck that the options were on the table. I mean, there's been a solidarity levy on airplanes, which makes total sense if you take into account that kerosene still goes untaxed. But also, I mean, we can look at other examples. I mean, it was already mentioned, we're going towards a fossil fuel phase out, and those companies have huge profits. So it seems like a natural case. Or let's, for instance, look at the financial transaction tax, something that where I think a lot of in the room also campaigned for, and which is also a good, very good way, very effective way to mobilize financing. So the technical solutions are there. We also have a strong support from citizens all over the world. It's great that we now have the open letter. This will help a lot. We have a first coalition of the willing, hopefully not the last one. We have different processes. So now is the right time to actually move ahead with implementation. And I think this is also important to note, is that what's good about these options is that they've all been tested and tried. It's nothing crazy. And they can be implemented very quickly, even for countries that don't have them, which also means that they can very quickly bring in the financing that we need. And I think this is also important, especially in today's world where, I mean, we know that agreement is so difficult. Diego said it, right? Multilateral space is nearly disappearing. And I think the financing discussion has been going on for such a long time without real solutions. This is a real solution that can be implemented very quickly and can provide the right financing at scale.
Great, thank you very much. And for anyone who wants more information, their website is very easy. It's solidaritylevies.org. Solidaritylevies.org. So you can get more information there. Now I'll pass to Blair. One of the, few cases with this as well. I mean, a case of success, but can you tell us what the political lessons are? Like what can the rest of the world and the rest of the country take from the achievement?
I mean, for us, there's been a lot of pushback out of Washington against our law, not surprisingly. The fossil fuel industry is quite powerful. But for us, to the extent that there's any secret sauce in what we were doing, it was the fact that we were able to match up the public costs with the oil companies' profits. That was the key thing, because people in New York, they know that it's going to cost more. We had orange air in New York City just a couple years ago. Upstate New York, which never gets rarely gets tornadoes, had 36 of them in one summer. So people are starting to get it, but again, it's sort of the slow burn. They don't really feel the intensity of it like they should. So in our case, the thing that really worked was the fact we were able to make an argument that married the interests of the environment with the interests of those who have to pay for public costs, the taxpayers. And so that was a different kind of argument, and that's what helped us ultimately carry the day.
Thank you. And I'll turn to Marinelle for just some data on where the public is. So if you could tell us a bit about that.
Thank you. There's actually a presentation on the survey there. So this survey tells us something very powerful, that people all over the world already want this change. This survey is conducted in 13 countries that represent nearly half the world's population. The survey shows overwhelming support for taxing fossil fuel corporations. So first we have 81% of people support taxing fossil fuel companies like oil, gas, and coal to pay for the damages they cause, like wildfires, floods, droughts, and health impacts. And that's not just a majority, that's overwhelming consensus. So people know who is responsible for this crisis. Second, when asked who should pay to support survivors of climate disasters, 66% of people said oil and gas companies, and 5% only said working people, and 9% said goods we buy, and only 20% said general business taxes. This is important. People reject unfair solutions. They want accountability directly from the corporations causing the damage. Third, we have 86% of respondents who wants the revenues from these taxes to go to the communities most impacted by the climate crisis. That means channeling funds to places like the Philippines, to frontline communities that are losing homes, livelihoods, and lives. And this is about justice, not just raising money, but ensuring it reaches those who need it most. Fourth, 75% said people who fly more often, travel in business class, or use private jets should pay more tax. This shows the public understands that responsibility isn't equal. Those who pollute more must pay more. Fifth, 68% said that the fossil fuel industry and the super rich have a negative influence on politics in their country. This is a reminder that it's not only about emissions, it's about political capture and why governments have been slow to act, unfortunately. People see through that. And next, 77% said that they would be more willing to support political candidates who prioritize taxing fossil fuel companies and the super rich. And that's a huge electoral signal. Making polluters pay is not only the right thing, it's also politically popular. Finally, in the US, 75% would support taxes on the oil, gas, and coal corporations to pay for environmental damages they cause, like wildfires, as I said earlier, floods, drought, and health impact. And let me ground this in my own country. In the Philippines, 84% support taxing fossil fuel companies. That's because we know the reality of losing everything to a typhoon while corporations continue to profit. And I think the lesson from this survey is very simple. The public is ready. They want fairness, accountability, and justice. The challenge is no longer about convincing people. The challenge is about building the political will to act on this overwhelming demand to finally make polluters pay. Thank you.
Can I just add one thing on this? We had polling done like that by political pollsters in New York, and that helped move the needle as well with elected officials. It made it really crystal clear that the public was with us and that the bad guys were the bad guys. And that made a big difference in terms of not only the sort of the technical understanding of what we were trying to do through the Climate Superfund, the political rationale. The numbers were almost identical to what you just saw.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll just add a few details on that, and credit to Greenpeace because they did that survey with Oxfam and the GSCC, which I forget what they stand for, the global something, but they're basically the global climate communications supremos. But so this the survey was done in 11 countries: Brazil, Canada, France, Germany, Kenya, Italy, India, Mexico, the Philippines, South Africa, Spain, the UK, and of course the US. More than these countries represent more than half the world. And just to add to what Blair said and what Marinelle said, the support is cross-partisan. Really shocking or surprising, and shocking in a good way, that 63% of US Republicans support that. And in Brazil, there was no difference between the supporters of Lula's party and Bolsonaro's party. It was the same, identical. So there's a huge gulf there that can be exploited. Now I'm going to turn to Diego. We asked you to talk about the obstacles. So now can you please be constructive and give us some solutions?
Okay. No pressure. No, I was thinking about this question, and I think for me, when I talk to many of our grantees, partners on the ground, allies in government, in local government, in the UN, etc., there are like three themes in general when it comes to how do we chart the way out of this mess to provide taxation, fair taxation, and really make the polluters pay. And I call this the three sides of the coin. So there's just not two sides, the three sides of that coin. The first side of the coin speaks a lot to what you were saying, Marino, on the vulnerability piece of this, right? I think like campaigning organizations, like advocacy groups, like emphasizing the vulnerability that connects all of us. And this is a very strategic communications piece that can be used more and more, like to really chart that way out of the current system, right? Whether you're in the Philippines or in Brazil or in Los Angeles or like in Kenya, like even though we're different, there are things that connect us in our vulnerability to this state of climate chaos that's being created right now. So the vulnerability is the one side of the coin. The second side of that coin is the solidarity. And I think that the work that France and Kenya and other countries and Federica are doing, like with the Global Level Solidarity Task Force, is one of the answers for this. But also, how do we look into solidarity at a local level, like distributing the revenue of oil companies in a way that's more equitable and just like more responsive to the local realities as well. Like you were saying, can we make sure that in that conversation, the communities that are affected are actually benefiting from this taxation as well? Like, because what is the point if we don't have that? And the third side of the coin that actually bounds everything together is the accountability. Right? In accountability, I think we need to look at this at several levels. At international level, there was discussions around the UN Tax Convention, for example, like that are really important in the next few years, but also at the local level, like what are the kind of policies that we are pushing in our like federal governments, in Congresses, like that will create the policy and the political space even to make the change that's necessary. So accountability is the side of the coin that bounds everything together.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you for mentioning the tax convention, because it's very important. I think, Arthur, France had proposed some language in the tax convention on sustained development. Do you want to just say a bit about that? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think France was a strong supporter of the introduction of this idea of solidarity levies in the tax convention in one of the protocols, but that has not been.
Could you speak closer to the mic?
Sorry, so France was a supporter of the introduction of the solidarity levies in the protocols that will be written jointly with the convention, but this proposal has not been retained, and we were a bit disappointed about that. But
yeah. So the tax convention, there wasn't acceptance for a protocol on sustainable revenues, but it is on the discussion table for inclusion in the convention. That's being negotiated over the next 2 years, I believe. So that's an important space for all of us to be aware of and to engage. Okay, now in terms of the idea of the coalition, I think we'll present the video. And then please be ready with your questions and comments. We'll turn to that next.
Who is most responsible for the climate crisis?
Stockholm Environment Institute aimed to uncover the truth.
We calculated the amount of carbon emissions attributable to the wealthy versus the average person. And the results are staggering.
A person in the wealthiest 1% tends to emit more than 77 tons of carbon pollution in a year.
That is equivalent of burning 32,797 liters of gasoline.
While an average person only emits 4 tons of carbon pollution in a year.
Or 1,700 liters of gasoline.
Regardless of country, low or high income,
it is the wealthiest people around the world who are emitting more than their fair share of carbon pollution.
And causing terrible harm to the majority of us.
Harm that is hitting hardest those who can least afford it.
Our current system is lining the pockets of the rich, reinforcing inequalities and putting chances of ending poverty even further out of reach.
Despite contributing the least to climate change, it is the people living in poverty who are disproportionately affected by rising sea levels, intensifying storms, droughts, fires, famines, and other effects of global warming.
Meanwhile, the richest 1% emit the same amount of carbon pollution as the 5 billion people who make up the poorest 2/3 of humanity.
While investing their wealth in polluting industries that accelerate the climate crisis,
they have distorted the global economy into a set of financial, political, and legal structures designed to support their lavish lifestyles.
The richest can afford to easily slash their emissions.
The majority of the world cannot.
Why not pose higher taxes on polluting investments and tax or even ban luxuries like private jets and super yachts?
A tax on polluting luxuries and investments would free up money that could fund local flood and fire prevention,
Improve public services like healthcare and transport,
and reduce extreme inequality around the world.
Because the climate crisis is a crisis of inequality.
Across the globe, people and communities are rising together and speaking out to transform our societies, not for the wealthy, but for the better of all.
Urge your leaders to make polluters pay and fund a fairer, sustainable, and more equal future.
when human rights are protected for all.
And current and future generation can live a life of dignity.
Right. Thank you, and thank you to the people who managed to get 30 different experts and activists to talk in unison. It's an amazing achievement. Okay, so I'll open up for questions. Please introduce yourself, and yeah, let's hear from you. Was that? Please. Oh, sorry, if you introduce yourself.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
My name is Ashley Oldenburg. I'm a student at Columbia, and I work with data for sustainability. My question is, how is the structure of the super fund and the taxing on profits prevented from being passed down to the consumer of those goods?
Yep, great, good question. So to the lady there, and can I ask if there are any journalists in the room who have any questions? Can you put your hand up? Okay, let me just bring the mic to you.
Hello, okay, a little close. Hello, I'm Ulitsi Viscara. I work at the Natural Resource Defense Council. I'm a Global Energy Transition Fellow, and I have a bit of a question on, you may not be able to answer, but I had a question on the survey that was conducted. I know that there was a slew of countries that were listed. It seemed to me like a lot of them were more higher to middle income countries, and so someone mentioned that their partner was in Brazil, and the local discourse there very much so differed on how these people saw the oil industry or fossil fuel industry. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what possible views were sort of excluded from this by not being more inclusive of maybe lower income countries in this survey or people of that demographic.
Sorry, could you speak closer to the, bring the mic closer to you?
My question refers to the initiatives Blair was talking about, are like those where, for example, New York is saying that they're going to tax the biggest polluters and redirect that money into future infrastructure projects, resilient infrastructure. And I was wondering if there are any discussions on not just redirecting that to the city or state where it's collected, but also transferring them for climate financing elsewhere where it's where countries or communities are more vulnerable as well. So will it exit the state as well?
Okay, Blair, I think two of the questions were to you.
Okay, so on the question of the communities, the legislation specifically says that at least a third of the money, 35% actually, is used for is directed to frontline communities. But how the money would be allocated is basically there's a public process. The state has to come up with a master plan, but a third of it, roughly, has to be used for frontline communities. But it's vague on that because, by the time the state gets done putting it all together, there may be some new catastrophe that we don't even know about. And the narrow focus, though, is it's only $75 billion, and the state is facing hundreds of billions of dollars in costs. The question on not passing the costs on to the public, there's sort of two parts to this. One is a sort of a classic economic argument, which I'm not the best person to answer. There might be good economists who could, but essentially the cost of a commodity is based on the extraction, transportation, refining of a product to the market. And these are about costs that were incurred in the past. So they're considered sunken losses. And that's generally not included in the price of a commodity now. The second argument, which I feel a bit more comfortable arguing, is that not all companies are in, and the companies that are in the program pay a percentage based on how much they're responsible. So if you were I'm making this up, but if you were Exxon, and let's say the equivalent of what you're paying is a dime a gallon of gasoline, and Valero is on the hook for $0, and BP is on the hook for a penny, how we as drivers would all go to Valero instead of so Exxon puts its market share at risk if it raises the cost of the product. And so that's what makes it different from a carbon tax in that way. And that's why we believe the economic argument, which there was, of course, economists that agreed with us, including Joseph Stiglitz, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, he says we're right, as well as sort of the marketplace forces that protect the public from the costs. Back to you.
Thank you. Then there was the question about the poll. Do you want to say anything, or shall I? Let me repeat the countries. So some of them were lower middle income countries, particularly India, and I believe Philippines is considered a lower middle income country. Brazil and South Africa are upper middle income. I don't think there were any least developed countries. Of course, there's a small number of countries, but that does reflect a whole range of people, living in poverty. So, but I don't know if anybody wants to touch on that question about work people interested in.
I do.
Benefits.
I do, because I feel like I was not involved in that poll, but having been involved in other polls in the past, I think that polling is always, a snapshot of a specific moment, right? And what they do is they help us tell a story, but you need to make sure that it's hooked into a bigger and longer narrative. What is happening in the case of Brazil in that specific community, for example, is that the polling is showing in Brazil, those numbers are replicated with Brazilian polls as well, but it doesn't capture the local domestic political reality, right? So in that case specifically, there are political incentives for local mayors, local politicians that are driving this agenda as well, that can rarely be captured in a poll in a country like Brazil with 210 million people, right? Even if you're doing the best job, it's really hard. So I think what polling like this does, and I've used many of those in the past, in interviews and stuff, is allow us to tell a story about the direction that we're going. And then by looking at the different realities like the one in the Amazon, allow you to deep dive and explain about why we're actually not seeing that progress as much as we see reflected in the polls, for example. Because you can argue, why then, if 85% of people agree on this, why we don't have that thing yet? It boils down to the local reality, to the domestic political dynamics that are blocking progress in congresses, in federal policy, everywhere you look, from Mexico to Colombia, Brazil, Philippines, across the world. So I think the poll helps us see the direction of travel, but it doesn't give us all the answers.
Yeah, well, we know a small group of people can change the world. And then what's the quote? That it's the only thing that ever has. And I mean, well, hey, the fossil fuel industry, they're doing pretty well at that. Because they have more at stake, right? So we've got to learn a lot to learn from them. In fact, one day I want to interview them and pick their brains and learn. Okay, any other questions, comments? So introduce yourself, Aubrey. Okay.
I think there's a hot potato being. It's a very important one. Maybe, I mean, obviously, there's no easy answer to it. I mean, first of all, it actually shows that obviously taxation is one lever, but not the only one, right? But I think also what I would say is that because we were asking ourselves the very same question within the task force, and we thought, okay, we need to come up with options that can be quite easily implemented by a coalition of the willing that doesn't need global agreement, and where we can avoid as much as possible leakage or profit shifting and so on. I mean, one thing why we actually already have a first coalition of the willing, and it's focusing on premium flyers, is precisely because there you can be sure, like, I mean, especially richer people, what they care about is getting very quickly from A to B. They won't be like driving from, I mean, New York doesn't make sense because the US is not part of it, but let's imagine from New York to Montreal to get a flight, right? They just want to get out of the country, or they just want to take their private jet. In terms of the fossil, I mean, I think I mean, on fossil fuels, I think one option we looked at, and I'm mentioning this also because of what the Prime Minister mentioned with the work done by the OECD. It's actually, there's been obviously very important work going on, and basically building on it and looking at taxing the profits of fossil fuel companies using the agreement that was struck at the OECD and the G20 on multinationals. Obviously, we know the context didn't get any easier since beginning of the year on this, but I don't think it means that we need to like throw away these options, because obviously some can be implemented quickly and others hopefully will, you know, make their way in a few years to come. But what I would say is that we're hearing this obviously a lot, also from governments and so on. I think there are obviously things that need to be looked at, and I actually call on everyone to go to the website solidaritylevies.org. Sorry. But we do have the studies on there, and we worked with a lot of experts. So you obviously need to look into it. But also I think what we need to say is that a lot of these options have been tested and tried. It's now more about making them more ambitious, more progressive, doing it in concert with others. I really hope that we can debunk a lot of this so that we can move to the implementation stage very, very quickly.
I'll just add 2 points. One, I mean, countries do capture a lot of corporation tax, right? Even where they are facing other competitors that have lower rates. So yes, it's a challenge, but it's not a block. It doesn't mean you can't do it. Second is there are many steps that are being taken, some which have been referred to limit that. Third, there's also the prospect for fixing this problem at the UN Tax Convention. It's a huge opportunity. In fact, the negotiations that are going to happen in Nairobi in November are particularly tackling that issue, and certainly the African tax justice movement are prioritizing profit shifting and taxing rights of the global south. So this is a bigger problem that also needs to be fixed alongside. Okay, we have time for a few more question interventions. Panelists, if you want to jump in, you also can. So I see Joe, and then the gentleman in front of him. So the one after another.
Thank you. I think the video put it really well, which is that there are wealthy elites in pretty much every country now. You know, the stat I saw was that the G7 has about 1,200 billionaires. The original BRICS countries, before they expanded, had about 800, and that's growing quite fast. But one of the challenges I
Big questions. Who would like to take it?
No, if I may start, I think that the letter which we just today sent to the leaders is one step towards that more cooperation is needed and really results also. But I think that what is sometimes needed is the momentum which was there after the financial crisis, and because of the progress, and after that the progress at the OECD was possible. When it comes to automatic exchange of information on tax matters. Before that, many countries were blocking it, but when they also were in the situation that, okay, we are really heavily suffering now because of the crisis, so maybe we are now obliged, or we are now obliged also to proceed. And I think when it comes to climate change, really more and more also political leaders really see in their eyes the situation that there is this urgency. I hope that this helps us to build the coalition.
You want me to say something?
No, I didn't say that you wanted to say something.
Maybe I can add on the question of the pass-throughs. It is expected that when there is an increase on something, then eventually there will be some pass-throughs. But the idea we have is even when there is a pass-through to the consumer, then how do they get reprieve in the funds that's going to be generated from this activity? So that is one way of looking at it. Then the other option, especially for the premium flyers, is the band that we are looking at. So the first class, the business class, and the private jet, which exempt the economy class, and that gives also a little leeway here and there. On the political momentum, the idea we had when we started this was purely to give political momentum so that these novel ideas that are outside the multilateral space finds its way into the main room. We had made some movement in Dubai, some gains in Baku, the COP, and in FFD4 Spain will be generous enough to accommodate, and now Brazil are dancing with it. So the political momentum is there, as we really need to push. And then you had the Club de Madrid and the 38 former heads of states. So I think the idea with the political momentum is it gains prominence, gets to the space it deserves, and eventually significantly contribute to the climate finance shortfall. As Federico was saying, on predictability, on the scale, on the debt-free finance. Thank you.
Okay, great.
I want to add to I want to answer to the second question. I think it's really important to have corporations together talking about this, and world leaders and heads of states. But I do think that it's also important how to laymanize the term of taxing the corporation, and to also have local people be part of the conversation. Because how can we see that that is actually happening if we don't have frontline communities in the table where we are making decisions about them, or just in that conversation where we're tackling about what's happening on the ground? That legitimizes, humanizes the climate crisis. When we see stories, and I'm not talking about just inviting a person to say that we have a frontline community in the room. That is tokenism, and we're past that, right? We don't want that anymore. We want people to be part of the conversation who are local, who have lived experience, so that you cannot just invalidate my reality, my experience, to say that that climate crisis didn't happen, because I'm here to tell you that I am an evidence to that. I have lost people in my life, and you cannot just tell me that climate change is not real. It is very important to have those voices and to amplify them, and to actually have that diversity, and not just focus on one sector, but to have that sector, diverse sector, to be in that conversation, so that every voices are represented.
Just to echo that point, I mean, you want to create, in a sense, surround sound, right? Where it's not just the environmentalists that want these things, it's frontline communities. It's the individuals. We had a whole network of survivors who had the stories to tell, some terrible, all terrible, but some not as devastating. Like one woman had to describe walking her kid back from school in knee-deep water in Manhattan because the streets were flooded. I mean, it's just simple things that people can connect to, and it's more about conveying the story that we're looking out for everybody. The guys who are opposed to it are not. And so it's like any political campaign. It's stitching together authentic voices and using words that bring people together on your side as compared to making it sort of a policy debate. It's more about us versus them.
Okay. I'll just jump in quickly on some of that point. I mean, in terms of the reaction against, elites and liberals, part of it has been that, who killed neoliberalism? It wasn't, I think the liberals played a part in it, but if you look to how many of the groups seen as populists, stood up for social welfare for them, not for immigrants, but for the majority. But there's been a huge shift that last year everyone was talking about neoliberalism being killed, and it wasn't us. It was some of the voices who push for exclusion for others, but inclusion for working class people. So that's really interesting. That's something we need to grapple with. And I think some of the solutions have been pointed to, show how taxing polluters will address cost of living, will help everyone, and ordinary working people. Joe's question, I don't know if it was specifically addressed, but it was about billionaires moving. And of course, there's a lot of evidence about how that taxing the rich doesn't actually lead to a huge number leaving. There is evidence for that, but there's also the question about for fossil fuel companies, how do you address that? And it's a challenge, but part of it might be to focus on taxing rights based on sales. So our good friend President Trump is actually taking advantage of the fact that if you want to sell to Americans, well, X, Y, Z. And in a sense, maybe that's something other countries need to. Why is everybody looking at me like this? Okay, and I'll stop there. Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, presenters, anyone wants any further solutions, anything that you want to add? Brilliant. Okay, I'd really like to thank you all and to thank the audience for great, really tough questions. Thank you. And we'll continue with this work and hopefully come back next year having a few more solutions and successes to share with everyone. Thank you. Question in the back?